We've already heard today about both the potential of AI, and that's really what we're trying to get here. That's the fruits we're trying to reap, but also some of the risks. So I'm not going to remind you about the risks. But what I think is important is how we start dealing with them. My background is in cybersecurity, and it's taken us a good 20 years to figure out how to do cybersecurity right. We still haven't figured it out. I mean, to this day, we have a €1 trillion cyber crime industry because companies won't take some basic steps to keep their systems secure. And I think the challenge we have on security and ethics when it comes to AI is how do we not repeat that error? And I'm optimistic. The discussions that we are now having are actually pretty far along. We have a group of NGOs that have talked about the ethical and the human rights concerns for years, and they're starting to be listened to by companies, by governments, by international organizations. The EU and the Council of Europe both have processes to figure out the human rights and the ethics dimensions. The UN is looking at how we might regulate the use of AI in military conflict. A lot of companies have come forward with principles on safe or ethical AI, and consumers are starting to pay attention. Indeed, we already have a legal framework to some extent. The EU's data protection regulation says quite a bit about how you have the right to not have an automated decision made about you and get information about the decisions that's been made. Just 2 weeks ago, California passed a law saying that as an individual, you have a right to know whether you're interacting with a human being or a bot. So we're starting to do all of the, I hope, right things, but we're doing it in silos. The discussion is fragmented. And the value of this summit, which brings together both political decision makers and some real experts from both academia and industry, is to start to bridge those silos and bring the discussion together. So we're going to hear from 5 leading experts who are not just going to talk about the theoretical concerns, but about what they've actually done, what their organizations are doing, make some practical proposals. Then I'm going to ask 4 policy leaders to respond to that and to give their own thoughts. And we're not going to be done there. We're going to have a bit of an open brainstorming on how to go forward. What I hope that emerges from this discussion and the next discussion that we'll have right afterwards are some concrete ideas on how we can bridge these silos, and we're going to take that brainstorming and try and put it into action. So that's my very general start. I want to thank you all for being here, and I'm going to hand straight over to Dan from Cybernetica, who's going to tell us about some of the exciting work that he's been doing.
Thank you very much. I'm Dan Bogdanov from Cybernetica, an Estonian company that has been solving the cybersecurity concerns of a nation for the last 21 years. So today I will be shedding a little bit of a light on our past work and how we believe that this is relevant also today. So the topic is how do analytics and AI will survive in this privacy-regulated environment. So let's go back a little bit. So when you design a government and its data architecture, then the question is typically, do you go for centralization, you pool things together, or you go for decentralization, you keep stuff apart, silos, as Luukas aptly called them. And now there are benefits to silos, because in 2001, when Estonia was having this discussion and taking the whole discussion in an academic way, then the decision was to go for the silos, because from an information security perspective, the risk was sufficiently reduced back then. That was the principle that became a leading one underneath the X-Road system that Estonia has for government services. When you need to launch a new service, you talk to the other data owners, and you have a platform on which you can build that service. And it all works wonderfully. We see it working in Estonia, all the services work, this is all nice. If you're interested in the particular think paper for that, then there is a reference on the slides, and contact me later if you'd like to read that. However, today that we are approaching AI and the analytics age, the decentralization argument is eroding a bit. The reason is that a lot of the data analytics and AI tools prefer data centralized in the same location. And that's also how data scientists of today are trained. They understand it, they would like to apply their methods with the tools they understand, and this assumes that data is brought to them. So there is a temptation to start centralizing again. And these discussions are ongoing in various governments around the world. And if this becomes hard otherwise, then there is even attempts to regulate and force centralization of data in some cases. Now, fortunately, technology has been keeping up. So we believe that, excuse me, analytics and AI can be achieved with decentralized data, and we have cases to show. There can be cryptographic techniques for this. Estonia piloted secure multi-party computation in 2015 to understand how working during studies can affect graduation times, and will pilot trusted execution environments probably in 2018, 2019. And anonymization is a different kind of technology, less cryptographic, adds more noise, reduces the signal. And while it's still hard to use these technologies correctly, then they will be a crucial tool in making sure that the data economy that Europe has been building will be in place. So there are currently plans to deploy this for sharing medical data. The take-home message from my talk here is that we don't need to shy away from using data-driven technologies and data-driven services. We need to build them in the correct way, and the Estonian experience is something that we will gladly be able to share, and I have been glad to see that also other countries in the world have been picking up cases in Japan, US, Denmark, Israel. So it is certainly something that I believe that together we can make this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Mr. Tan Chihao from Singapore, please.
Let me just get my slide. First of all, very happy to be here representing the Singapore government on this topic and to be with all the panel. So in Singapore, we have launched an ambitious plan for Smart Nation. We have termed Smart Nation, and it really is about digitalization at a national level. So unlike just at a city level, we have many smart cities. We are embarking on this at a project at a national level. And we see it in three ways: digital government, so the government has digitalized, digital economy, and also society, so the whole of nation effort. Earlier this year, we launched ambitious blueprints in the area of digital government. We have a framework for action for the digital economy, and in terms of bringing the people along, also a digital readiness blueprint, so comprehensive effort. Last year as well, the area of AI, we heard many things this morning, but we launched we said that we invest about $100 million into a national research program for AI. And we see AI sort of as the multiplier that's going to take our Smart Nation efforts going forward in a much bigger way. Just briefly talk about how we are approaching the issue of governance from Singapore's perspective. In order for really an AI-powered Smart Nation, we think we need capabilities, we need a culture of innovation, but most importantly, underlying it all is the confidence and trust in the people. So the people and society must feel that they trust AI. When we develop our frameworks, we go about in three different ways. One is that it must be a national effort. It's not just the government, but together with the industry, with the academia, we must all come together. Secondly is that the government cannot just be a regulator. We believe very firmly in this, and we think that's something that's quite critical. So as Singapore government, we are embarking on various projects ourselves. For example, we have a national jobs bank, and we are coming up with a recommendation engine to match people to jobs. But obviously, once you do that, there's going to be a lot of issues about fairness, about transparency, and I think we have to address that head on. And finally, it's about, as we can't do it as a single nation. We have heard that it's not also just a role for the big nations, the big companies, but all the like-minded parties, like all of us around the table here, have to play a role. And finally, I just sort of briefly touch on what we're doing specifically in Singapore. We have sort of set up an advisory council that's chaired by a former Attorney General and is bringing together parties. We have representatives from Alibaba, from Google, and from our own Singapore Temasek. So it's sort of representing both the East and the West, and we think it's a good combination of different views as well as from EU. We have put up a draft framework about advocating transparency, fairness to the consumers, and also that the importance of making sure our AI systems are human-centric. And finally, we embarked on a research program with one of our universities to sort of understand better how do you measure, how do you evaluate the ethical frameworks around AI. And finally, all this is based, underpinned by a strong legislative framework that we have, sort of both for the private sector and public sector. That's all I have, and I look forward to hearing more views from the rest.
Thank you. Impressive the work you've been doing. Mr. Kosako Yamaguchi from Japan, please.
Introduction?
Press the microphone.
Hello, I'm Kosaka Yamaguchi from FFI Inc. Our main tasks are security field, but also in the AI. But now we are focusing on how we can not only by security, but how we can limit artificial intelligence in the society. And there's no, we still don't find the best balance between limitation and promotion. That we still discussing with the government sectors and also the private sector right now.
Thank you. Ms. Åsa Schwartz from Sweden. Can you press the button again? Thank you.
Okay, does it work now? Yeah. My name is Åsa, and I'm working on a major cybersecurity company in Sweden, and we are one of the larger players in the region. And I have recently worked with a number of implementation of cybersecurity laws in organizations. And I would like to briefly explain the need for legal foundation to enforce safe development of AI systems, and above all, the need for it to be in line with previous cybersecurity legislation and methods. Within corporation and other organizations, current risk management regarding IT system is primarily based on two different points of view. The first is the risk regarding the organization itself, which need to be managed in order to safely continue with operations. The second is the individual perspective, which is regulated by privacy laws, like, for example, the Data Protection Act. Here, the risk of potential repercussions or mismanagement of personal data, and within organizations that handle a large amount of sensitive personal information, and within governmental bodies, current legislations requires an independent data protector officer who ensures compliance with existing requirements. And from a societal point of view, we have a different legislation with focus on activities of importance to Europe, for example. One example is the NIS directive, which aims to ensure the reliability and security of networks and information security services, which are essential for everyday activities. The problem is that currently we lack a comprehensive legal framework to protect society and the rest of the world against organizations which are irresponsible in the development of artificial intelligence. Furthermore, we have no acknowledged standards, method, or indeed procedures within the area. As a result, as long as the integrity of management of personal data is maintained, there are currently no restrictions other than ethical on any irresponsible development of artificial intelligence. And to manage the gap between regulation and the capability of the new AI system, it will be essential to introduce processes within the organization which focus on management of risk associated to methods and guidelines that can be complemented by our current knowledge of research within artificial intelligence. Notably, potential risks are far more wide-ranging than cybersecurity and have a large impact on fairness, ethics, and transparency. So I have just some few suggestions that we can do. The first one is to define fundamental principles that should guide the development of artificial system from security, fairness, ethics, and transparency and accountability. And I think there today is some good initiatives around the world. And second, is to legislate against irresponsible development of artificial intelligence. This legislation can be similar to, for example, the Data Protection Act, and which focus on protection of society as opposed to protection of the individual. And the third is to find a model for safe development of artificial intelligence, which the legislation can refer to. Such a model could be used to determine whether the right test has been done or correct principle of the system are designed. But what I really want to emphasize on is that such a model should not deviate from, but rather complement existing models and processes for secure development like for example, Microsoft Security Development Lifecycle or in Privacy by Design. And my last suggestion is that the developer for artificial intelligence system need to have a process for independent verification. An example could be an independent representative who verifies the organization, which, if the organization complies to the legislation. For example, an AI protection officer, similar to the data protection officer. So, finally, I just want to re-emphasize that all legislation within the area must mirror existing legislations and methods for secure development. And otherwise, we will not get the result we're aiming for.
Thank you, Åsa. And finally, Daniela Kanina, also from Sweden, please.
So, do you have the clicker, Åsa? So, my name is Daniel Akkenainen. I work as the Chief Technology Officer for Microsoft in Sweden. So I would like to take this couple of minutes to bring up two initiatives from Sweden, basically, which is related to AI and particularly to responsible AI. So the first initiative is really circulating around the question. So to what degree must authorities really be transparent on how they use AI versus citizens? Are they allowed to use AI how they want, or is there a need for some kind of transparency? So this was actually a question that I was looking into, and the Swedish Commission was looking into during the last year. So I was one of the experts there, and we were looking into several AI-related questions, but this was particularly one which I think is interesting in this panel. So what we found out was not necessarily rocket science, but there is a proposition from the Swedish, which is currently a public inquiry on review, which basically is saying that an authority or an agency must ensure that information can be provided on how this authority is using AI or algorithms. So this is basically something that is a proposal right now in the Swedish government, and it would mean that an agency has to more or less be able to show how it's using AI. The other question is also related to transparency and how they are actually using this AI in an explainable way. I think this is a more complicated question, really. But there is a recommendation in this inquiry to create a proposal on how you possibly could do revisions, or you could do some kind of certification or some kind of other type of control to check that the algorithms and the AI that is used by the government is all of these things that we have been talking about, secure and bias-free or transparent. So the question right now is really, should there be some kind of authority in the state that should be responsible for the quality review of this? And this is something we're going to look into further. Another initiative is based on the question, how do you involve the not usual suspects in AI? So I think the usual suspects is AI researchers, it's the IT industry, but AI is to some extent a little bit different. So it also affects other persons. It involves health, for instance, which don't necessarily is so IT involved. It involved architects. So we have been having, for instance, a lot of discussion with architects. How will AI transform society? How do you want to live differently? And how will that affect how cities are built or houses are built? So what I was part of as well was kicking off an organization or an initiative called AddAI.org, which is really bringing together a lot of these not usual suspects. So it's really presenting what AI has the capabilities of doing and getting input from sociology, getting input from the law sector and from architecture and a lot of other. So, thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. So I think what we've heard from our experts is that there are both technological and regulatory aspects to this, and that in a sense there's a lot of continuity to the work we've been doing on other ways of making our digital society safe, but that new action may be needed. I like your point, by the way, Daniel, about architects. Our Prime Minister's IT advisor is actually an architect by training, so architects definitely have a role in this. I have a number of questions for you, but they're kind of backup questions because I'm actually hoping that our 4 political leaders here have good questions for you and their own thoughts. And we're going to ask them to intervene, and then we're going to have a more open discussion. So, Mr. Prime Minister, I'd like to go to you first, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Luukas. If I may, then I also would like to add our experience and about the risks and about the vulnerability and how to be better prepared for the next vulnerability. What, as Dan just described, we have chosen data decentralization for government and for data security, and we have also taken a bit decentralized approach when crisis appears. Public and private sector working together, and this also happened last year. And just if I may to describe you, due to the large usage of e-services, the digital security and citizens' residents, and also e-residents, is and will always be a top priority for our country, for Estonia. And it is also a question of trust. Therefore, the security vulnerability in the Estonian ID had to be only addressed openly and transparently. And the ID card security vulnerability illustrates how much societies actually depend on fundamental digital infrastructure. In Estonia, the crisis management efforts revealed the need to review specific process, administration of the ID card, risk assessment, and as well as interagency cooperation. Risk management and continuity planning in Estonia ID card is means of authentication and electronics signing for close to 5,000 public and private sector e-services. In most of these cases, the options to face-to-face and handwritten signatures is no longer an acceptable, this kind of alternative here in Estonia. Therefore, electronic alternatives to the ID card are being developed and integrated into services. For other governments and private companies, this serves as a useful case of risk management and continuity planning. And openness risks arising from vulnerabilities in fundamental digital infrastructure cannot be managed without the involvement of the stakeholders, including the public and the media. Broad-based cooperation between national, international and corporate stakeholders can lay basis for long-term solutions that allow to overcome problems not yet seen beyond the horizon. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we now have the privilege that we have ministers from 2 of the world's great industrial leaders, Germany and Japan, with us. So I'm going to ask first Dr. Krings.
Thank you very much. I think if we talk about artificial intelligence and security, we talk about security gaps, about security breaches. And of course, as a Minister for the Interior, mainly we are concerned with also infrastructure. We have passed a few years ago a law governing security in our infrastructure. But of course, infrastructure nowadays is largely private in most of our countries. The water supply, electricity, and all these things. So we have to deal with the private sector. And one approach that we also use for these laws is if we want a police law or public law approach. So we set minimal standards, we have introduced a duty to report on breaches of security, and all these kinds. But I think our legal system, our society works also in many areas with a private law approach. So somebody who doesn't care about his products, his security in this company, for example, in the service he provides, will face liability. Liability is a very strong detergent to clean out possible or difficult and negative influences on your company or on the product. So this concept of liability is key, I think. And I think that artificial intelligence poses a new challenge to this concept, because who is responsible for a decision? Who can we attribute this liability to? Therefore, even some very smart lawyers in Germany have made a proposal, I don't agree with it, of course, to give machines their own legal personality, to make machines responsible. Of course, behind machines there has to be somebody who pays them, because machines normally don't have a bank account that can settle some bills. But I would be interested to hear from the experts, what can we do to have this idea of liability, and that means responsibility, in an area where there's less transparency than in the traditional form of decision-making, traditional forms of processes. How can we make this still be a key issue for security, for safety, also for a company to fulfill the legal obligations? And that means we have to have transparent systems, we have to be able to attribute a responsibility, but how can we do this in an age of artificial intelligence?
Thank you, Dr. Grings. And Mr. Takuya Hirai?
Let me introduce myself. I am Takuya Hirai, the Minister in charge of IT, science, technology, intellectual property. Also, we call Cool Japan. It's a Japanese, tradition, culture promotion, and so on. And I was appointed as a minister October 2nd, so I'm a baby minister. And I also have a concern on security when we talk about AI, because we need to protect the trillion of the future by small errors or unsuitable design in AI. What if AI will be installed widely in cyber attacks? We also have to use AI for cyber defense, and the area of decision making will be reduced. And AI may create an answer. It is more reasonable to reduce human itself. I personally think we should limit usage of AI in area of supporting human decision making. But if we accept the AI in decision making area, we need support from private sector how to regulate or limit the usage. And I'm planning to legislate a new law in the next coming diet. We call that it's a digitalization promotion bill. In another way to call that bill is a digital first bill. We accelerate an implementation of digitalization in the public sector, private sector, local government, whole societies. And once we legislate this law, we cannot go back to the analog. So there is many risks. Also, we need understanding of the nation. So also, our problem is we have, super elderly, aging society. My mother is 87 years old. She cannot use a phone, but how can I make her happy using AI? So if you have some kind of solution for make the elder people happy using AI, please give us an idea. Yeah, that we need, on the double. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, from a country that has perhaps benefited from digitization even more than Estonia, Mr. Pat Breen from Ireland.
Thank you very much indeed, Luukas. And let me say I'm delighted to be here and thank the Prime Minister for the invitation here. I suppose Ireland, like many other countries, relies so much on technology, and particularly the digital technology. And the more digitalized we get, Luukas, the more vulnerable we are out there to what's up there and what's out there. And that's why it's really important that government takes measures and steps to ensure that we do protect both our public data and the amount of multinational companies that we have. And of course, Ireland has been, very much, we get a lot of multinational companies into Ireland, particularly ICT companies who have made Ireland their headquarters into Europe. And of course, they store a lot of data as well. But from our point of view, I suppose just take you back to earlier this year when GDPR came into place. And as you know, we were one of the first countries in Europe to have a data protection minister as well. But when GDPR came into place, we ensured, first of all, that our data commissioner was well resourced. We think it was really important to have our office well resourced. She is an independent commissioner and works independent of the government, but in the last number of budgets we secured about 6 times her fold of tripled, more than 6 times her budget, which we felt was really important. So we had a strong awareness campaign out there in relation to GDPR, particularly for the SME sector, which we think was, particularly I think we had a problem with that. Also, I suppose in our own department, or in our own government, we have the NCSC, which is the National Cybersecurity Centre, based in the Department of Communications. We've been able to give additional resources there as well. I think what's important there is that that as a government we collaborate with businesses and with companies out there. And that's really, really important, and we're working really hard there. In relation to, I suppose, legislation and what we're doing out there, recently the Data Sharing and Governance Bill passed through the Houses of Parliament. And I think that was really important because it encouraged the legal basis for sharing data. Presently, the Prime Minister's Department is also preparing the National Digital Strategy. And there's been a lot of consultation here with the stakeholders here. That's really important to ensure that, that stakeholders are consulted here and that we develop the best regulations, the best framework out there. And particularly for those that have responsibility for the disruptive technologies, that's artificial intelligence and big data. So, we believe artificial intelligence will boost our economy, and that's why we're promoting the whole area of artificial intelligence. We're working with the third level institutions. Some of our best third level institutions at the moment are doing MS Science courses online to ensure that we're ready for that. And so, it's important for us because we feel, that cybersecurity, ICT first of all is really important to us, and cybersecurity is central to the growth of ICT and the growth of our economy as well. So we're doing a bit at both government level and also working collaboratively with the big companies out there who are doing their bit as well in relation to developing AI labs in Ireland. So that's part of what we're doing at the moment. We want to be the best in the class, and that's exactly what we're at.
Good. So we have about 25 minutes, and I want to open this up, and we're going to take comments sort of in the order that you want to speak, so raise your finger and I'll try and keep track. I think we had a couple of really important questions and ideas raised by our political leaders. One was around liability, and also the idea that, look, a lot of what's being developed is in the private sector. It's not just the public sector here. A number of countries are working on regulations, and so one of the things I'm curious to hear about is, what are the things that you definitely should put into a regulation, and what is it maybe damaging to put in? I mean, there is a cost factor. All of these transparency rules, they cost something. You have to hire people, you have to put into place additional technologies, and while we're having this wonderful discussion about security, we have some parallel discussions on how to win the AI race and move forward as fast as possible. I also really like the question about how to make AI work for the 80-year-old grandmother. We heard this morning about coding love into algorithms. And this is actually, on this question of how to make AI ethical, where the researchers have gotten to is that one of the most important things to do is not just to teach the AI what not to do and how to avoid making harm, but actually how to create good, how to value the same things that humans value and actually create good. And that's a difficult computing challenge, but it's also a challenge for the business leaders and the policy leaders to motivate the computer scientists to work on this. So I want to open up the floor. I'm sure you all have a lot of thoughts. If you don't, I'll start picking on people one by one, so you've been warned. Please, Daniel.
So I would like to address the question on liability from Dr. Kring. So we also had that discussion in the AdAI group, so where there's a lot of lawyers. And the thing is, what they are basically driving the discussion on right now is that you have 2 types of liabilities, of course. It's organizations or it is persons. But if you want to have a digital person in the middle, what is the reason for doing that? I think the reason for doing that is if we are getting AI that we want to be autonomous and we want to be empowered as well, then it probably is shifting some kind of liability over to this digital person. I personally don't think we are there right now. It could be in the future possibly going in that direction, but I don't think it's a super urgent to regulate on that.
Please.
Thank you. I wish to address share some thoughts about regulation, since there seems to be quite a lot of interest in that. I think from Singapore's perspective, I think the ultimate objective as we think about all these regulations must first be to make progress and to harness digitalization and new technologies like AI in a sort of useful way. As my minister in Singapore likes to say, just because we have all these cyber attacks doesn't mean we go back to pen and paper. We still have to make progress. We have to harness technology. And when we released the Digital Government Blueprint earlier this year in Singapore, actually we made a strong pitch and a strong commitment that all our services will be end-to-end digital, which means no more non-digital, whether paper or other options in the middle. So that's really a big commitment. There was a discussion just now about how do you build happiness. And so again, in our Digital Government Blueprint, it may be a bit counterintuitive, but our vision is actually to allow the government to serve with hearts. So it's not about making everything into digital form or into machines, but how can the government serve with hearts, better impact the people and bring the people along, but at the same time using digital technologies. And finally, I wish to make a sort of pitch about how to approach regulations. Right? In Singapore, we have laid out what to regulate, not what not to regulate. In Singapore, we have laid out strong foundations in terms of data protection, like personal data, in terms of cybersecurity. I think these are important preconditions. But in AI, where it's rapidly changing, every couple of months something new is coming up, I think we want to take a more facilitative approach. So we have introduced the idea of sandboxes, regulatory sandboxes. One notion is physical sandboxes around physical locations. So we have certain districts in Singapore that are where you can do autonomous vehicle testing, and it's basically without over-regulating in the first instance. Another area is a bit more conceptual sandboxes. So in fintech, there's been a lot of new developments, new technologies being trialed, new business models. And again, if we impose some of the financial regulations and all the reporting regulations, it's going to be very tough for technology to proceed. So we want to better understand how many of these things work, including government trying it ourselves before we regulate. I think that's probably a balance we're trying to strike.
Thank you. Please, Osa.
Okay. I was thinking about how to make your mother happy. It's completely off subject, but I'll just tell you what some of my colleagues did. They took a robot to school and made the children play with it and asked them what to do with the robot. And it ended up that it was the teacher for the gymnastic lessons, and it was also learning kids that have really problem with learning languages. So my suggestion is just bring fun stuff like robots and things like that to your mother, and I think she will find out what to do with it.
I like that idea. So we had an idea this morning, and it's also in the background briefing for our discussion today, about more monitoring and more transparency. So OpenAI told us that one of the first things we could do is just get more information out there. So my question to our political leaders is, and Mr. Breen spoke about needing to put more money into this on the government side. Do you think that's the type of thing we should fund? I'm not asking you to commit your parliaments right now. I know budget discussions are always hard. But is that the type of thing that you think it might be worth going to the taxpayer for and saying, this is actually worthwhile to spend some money on? Anyone want to take that?
I think if we are talking about the financing and the many aspects, like I said, in Estonia we have thousands of different e-services. And I think here is this kind of main question is what it gives, what different e-services, what it gives to the people in the streets. Could they save their time, could they save their money, or some other benefits? And if it is useful for them, then the second aspect is it trustful? What lot of your experts you are talking today, and also transparent. And also who could check or control who looked my data. And if we could create this kind of protection, and also the different services or e-services, they are so transparent, then I think the people or the society or the private sector, and I would like to add also the cooperation across the borders between different countries, between different companies and so on, we need it. And if we need it, then we must, every year, it isn't that we are building today, I don't know, this puddle or some other thing, and that's all. It means that every year we must more and more make the investments. And then I think the society and also the parliament, Luukas, is ready to invest more. Thank you.
Please, Dr. Krings.
I'm not sure whether transparency is mainly a question of money or funding. I think it's also a question of explaining the use, but also even less explaining than just making the people want to have things like that. So I'll give you one example. We have also, as many countries, a ID card with a digital function. It was optional. Nobody wanted it. When I would go to my local town hall and to apply for a new digital ID, and I asked, what's with this digital function, they said to me, oh, you don't need that. So there was no function, but there was no real use for it, so nobody wanted to have it. Today, in many cases, for example, when I bought an airplane, I kind of, as a kind of ID, I use my iPhone or another smartphone. So people want to have that. It's cool to have this app there, and you can download your boarding pass and so on. And there are all kinds of other cool functions that companies were able to instill or to start the wish to have this. And you want to have this function, and you want to use this kind of digital feature. And the governments are, at least in my case, and I would probably assume that some other countries will face similar experiences, are not as good as private companies to instill this wish to use modern AI or just digital technology. So I think there we can maybe learn from private companies to say how can we make, as you mentioned, Prime Minister, things easier, that it's that you have one walk less to the local town hall, you can do things digital. I think there Estonia is certainly a role model for us, at least as Germans and for many other countries. And on the other hand, of course, people are more critical when government does something than if private companies do something. For example, we have problems in the Ministry of Interior to convince people in Germany that we need certain data to protect them when it comes to serious crimes, even terrorist attacks. And sometimes the same people are willing to readily giving the same data to private companies, even if it's just getting double payback points or something like this. That's some economic. So I think there the government, that's unfortunately, or maybe it's right, so true, we have to explain more. And I think there government have a big duty to say why we need the data and why we should think people should give or should accept that government collects certain data. So there I think the government has to do much more. I'm not sure whether it's mainly about funding, it's mainly about putting it in the focus of policy, and also be ready to enter into this discussion, because you always in every discussion have at least a small minority who was very critical and very aggressive against you, but you have to stand this. It's part of the duty of politicians, I think, to sustain this.
Yeah, the leadership job is important. By the way, I note that both you and Mr. Takuya Hirai both have the newest model of smartwatch, so you're also giving a lot of your personal data to the tech companies. Dan, on the note of tech companies, I'm sure you have a technological solution to fix everything for us.
No, sorry, I was going to talk about people.
Microphone.
I was going to talk about people instead. So if we're talking about investment, then the investment into skills is going to be crucial, because the whole AI and the whole transparency aspect, there's going to be a strong part of, so what does this algorithm actually do? And that's a very hard question. From computer science, we know that this is something that cannot be figured out by computers. You can try to build an AI for it, but trying to ask an AI to figure out what another AI does, I think that's hard. So instead, every country is going to need people who understand the technology and what its implications will be, so that when somebody builds something that really creates value, then this value can grow across the world. It's the same with AI, it's the same with blockchain. Once somebody builds something reasonable with a technology, then everybody who has the skills to access that value will benefit from it. So if I would urge, then investing into people and skills will help with transparency, and it will help with creating happiness.
So I have Åsa Schwartz and I have Mr. Pat Breen, and then Mr. Yamaguchi, I know we haven't heard much from you, so I'd also like to give you the chance to talk about FFRI and what you're doing. Please, Åsa.
I would like to talk a little bit more about skills. In Sweden, we have a lack about 40 or 50% in cybersecurity specialists. I don't know how it's here, but in the US, I think it's 250,000 cybersecurity specialists jobs that has well, they're lacking about 250,000 cybersecurity experts. And we are working quite hard as a company to develop new persons, but our government doesn't do that much about this. And I don't know how it's in your countries. How do you develop this kind of specialists? Because if you then combine cybersecurity with AI, you have like 5 people in each country. And I think that is our big challenge.
Indeed. Mr. Breen?
Just briefly, a question I had for the panel over there, and I suppose something we briefly touched on, is the rapid pace of technological change that's out there at the moment. How can organizations, can they cope with that change out there at the moment? They may understand cybersecurity, but do they understand the challenges cybersecurity brings to the organizations? And of course, we can't work alone in this. This is where the EU single digital market, this is where countries collaborating together need to work to ensure that we collaborate, share information, work together in relation to this. So, that's just an area, the whole challenge we have out there now with the pace, the change that's out there. We have a course in one of our universities in Dublin at the moment. It's a 4-year graduate degree course, computer science course. The last 2 years of the course are not there yet, the semesters of it, because there's going to be the pace of change means that course is going to change. So how are we going to deal with that rapid pace of change that's coming in the area? And I'm talking about the artificial intelligence, talking about the robotics, all that area, virtual reality, the whole lot. Are we ready for it?
I'm going to abuse my position as moderator to give my own quick answer to that. So I'm chairing a working group right now in an international organization on AI ethics and rights, and one of the values of that is we've got experts from many different countries coming together. And so we can aggregate wisdom that most individual countries can't. And we can get those experts in the room fairly quickly for a policy-making pace and actually come up with some recommendations. So one of the values of doing these things together, it sounds paradoxical, but we can actually move faster, because if you're a small country that needs to gather all these experts together and think things through, it actually takes longer sometimes than getting together in the same room. But please, Kosako Yamaguchi, please.
Okay, we're working very hard on endpoint security. So, if we talk about artificial intelligence for cyber attacks, for example, then I'm a little skeptical that if the government sector or public sector has a time to decide something, they can prepare the environment to tackle with the cyber attacks. But if the bad guys is going to use the artificial intelligence, then they will speed up more. So I think that more efforts from the private sector and cooperation with the government sector will be more important. And for example, if we talk about the endpoint security, then data is more carryable compared to before. For example, you're using smartphones and laptops. And if you talk about internet security software and the smartphone or laptops, you're mostly using the whitelist-based security softwares. But we don't have like enough time to tackle with the cyber attacks by artificial intelligence and with the targeted attacks. So we have developed using the AI technologies to protect from the attacks.
So if you're using AI, are you using the AI to counterattack?
Yes.
Wow, that's of course big if we think about responsibility and security.
Also the machine learning and AI, yeah.
That's a crazy world out there, because I mean that means in effect, and this is happening a lot, is that it's not just about how we can use AI to make ourselves more secure, but actually giving the AI the power to then respond to these attacks. And that brings us back to the liability questions. It brings us back to a lot of questions of international law. Daniel, and then I'll note that we have a few minutes left, so if anyone wants to make a quick 30-second final intervention before we draw to a close.
I think I would like to bring up continue that discussion to some extent, because I think the main question is, will AI make us more secure in the future or less secure in the future? And I think the challenge with AI is to some extent that an AI solution is bringing all of the traditional IT security problems as well with it. But in addition, it brings new security problems. And I'm thinking about somebody stealing the machine learning models, for instance, or doing manipulation of the input to the machine learning models. So it brings up new security threats as well. So it makes it even more complicated to some extent. So even though you have some other things that is happening on the good side, it's also creating a more challenging environment.
Åsa?
I will just very shortly address a subject we haven't done yet, and that's the security of IoT, our products at home. They are today very unsecure, and it's mainly because the suppliers think that the customer don't want it, and the customer thinks that the supplier is supplying it. And now we are going to put AI in the products, and the risk is increasing a lot when you have AI in this unsecure product. So I would really much like us to work with the IoT security, because that is the first step to secure HI.
Any last thoughts, please?
We are planning to revise our cyber security basic law in the next diet session. The point is information sharing among public sector, private sector, and academic. Mainly information sharing of engineers to protect Olympics in the first place and afterwards. And it is very hard, to control the information sharing, because we don't have a system of security clearance, the people, like United States. So we have to believe the people. But next, organization we are planning to make is it's a mandate to, keep the secret for everyone. So that kind of, law is first in Japan. So I'm afraid opposite party will against that kind of law. So I will do my best.
Well, perspective changes when you're in government sometimes.
Right.
Mr. Prime Minister?
We are talking to security. Yeah. We are talking to security in the streets every hour. And the same question is actually here in this digital society. What you said, I think it's very right, that we could only solve this kind of very hard questions if we had a good cooperation between the private and the public sector. This example, what I gave to you, this ID card vulnerability, it happened, let's say, in the beginning of September last year, and 6 weeks later, we had internet voting, internet elections, the local elections, and then we made a record. I could say that about 33, let's say 1/3, made their choice by the internet way. And I think the reason was only to manage this question. Less than 6 weeks was very good, really good cooperation between private and the public, plus, of course, the universities.
Well, please.
I wish to just sort of echo the whole point about collaboration and conversation. I think when there's a lot of uncertainty about how technology is moving, it's moving so quickly, I think that's going to be so important. And it's not just about cooperation between the public and the private sector, but cross sectors as well, because every sector is going to have its own unique sort of characteristics. And finally, I think it also has to be multinational, whether countries big and small, should have sort of have to have the conversation and start talking about many of these at important forums such as today. And it's just an open invitation to everyone in this room, whether you are from governments or private sector or academia, to sort of have a dialogue with Singapore on this.
Thank you. Dan?
I wanted to close my position saying that regulation doesn't have to destroy progress. There can be great progress in AI. If you do data protection and AI together, you will still be able to build the services that other people are building. You'll just know how to do them properly.
Mr. Breen?
Just briefly, I just wanted to highlight the importance of the SME sector, I think, for all of us in all our countries. In Ireland alone, they make up about 95% of the industry and they employ about 70%. These don't have the same voice as the bigger companies, and I think that has to be acknowledged, and they don't have the same resources as well. And I think, you know, I think everybody is in agreement here in relation to the collaboration. And that collaboration must be a trusted collaboration between big industry, small industry, governments, and of course third-level institutions. They play a very important role. They're educating you know, the graduates of the future in these areas, whether it's artificial intelligence or whatever. These are key players here, as well as industry, because industry knows the trend of what's happening, and we, you know, they also know the importance of the, you know, what's happening and the revolution that's happening at the moment in relation to the pace of the technological changes. So it's this collaborating. There are no borders here, no barriers here. We have to work together and to protect and engage all of us, both at international level and at national level, and ensure that we respond to any incidents, and we do that together.
Thank you. I'm not even going to try and summarize this discussion. We've had a lot of important questions put on the table. Some of them are in the brief that I prepared for you, but not all of them. But what I will say is this. I knew we'd have 5 smart experts, but I'm also very positively impressed that we have 4 really quite well-informed political leaders. And your job is hard because you're managing the complexity, and you have to take all of the different thoughts that have been raised here, and this is a small part of your portfolio of concerns. So the one positive note I want to finish on is that if we have people like you putting this together, putting some things into legislation, but also leaving things open for global cooperation, for the private sector, I feel like we can make progress on this. So I hope, as Mr. Tan Chi-hao said, that this is the beginning of conversations. It's important that the conversation is global. The product and service markets are global. The ideas and the worries are global. And once again, thank you for your time. I hope that you all give yourselves a quick hand of applause, and let's continue this discussion.